All right, Dosty, welcome back. We're
Yes,
back. We're back from the grave.
we're
Here we
back
are.
causing trouble.
I love it. That's right, man. Telemark Pirate Radio at its finest with us two. So
Yeah.
that's. I don't think it gets better than that. Um, cool, man. Well, good to see you. Yeah, the impetus of our conversation the other day, we were talking on the phone, and we get talking, and you and I always have these crazy conversations. We just get talking about telemark, man, and I always laugh because I can't really have the same conversations with most other people. I mean, honestly, I don't even know. The conversations we generally have are unique to us, and I always think that's pretty funny. And I thought it'd be cool and to
Yeah.
do a podcast. And yeah, despite yeah, I don't know. I barely even knew how to set up the podcast gear, man. It's been so long since I did it. So this is the perfect opportunity to get back rolling. So, anyways, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I got one day in already so far this year. Did not buy the Icon Pass. Um, I've, the resort experience is just not that interesting or endearing anymore to me because it's almost always packed powder. And I like riding lifts. I don't mind the crowds. I mean, it's not as bad as, let's put it this way, the crowds on the slope are not nearly as bad as the crowds on the road there. And once I get through with the combat driving to get there, I'm okay. But the snow experience, it's, I'm a telemark skier. I want soft snow. And so if I want soft snow, more is a guarantee. I got to go in the backcountry. And I don't care if I only get one or two runs, as long as I get one or two great runs with soft snow.
You know what's funny is whenever people uh maybe this is something from that era of you too, because I've always said like the whole a lot of early, I think, versions of how people talk about telemark kind of come from that Coular era when you were doing the magazine and stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
I'll tell you, I don't think we've ever talked about this. This is funny because it's still common practice. Like I'll get emails or a phone call or whatever, and people will say, "Oh, that ski resort is a good telemark mountain," and I'm always like, "What does that even mean?" And I think what I started understanding is it's the soft snow thing, you know. And I'm not. I get it, dude. Powder's the way to go, man. Powder's great.
It doesn't even
Um,
have to be powder, it just has to be soft. It can be mush as far as I'm concerned.
yeah, that's true too. But it's funny because people would like designate mountains as good telemark mountains, and I could never understand. And I think I started thinking down the line that it was because of soft snow or I don't know, maybe I don't know. People chime in. What makes a good telemark ski mountain? Um, but just even the way the word gets used sometimes, like I'm always like, are we even using the word correctly? Like it's actually the term, right? But we use it for all these other things, which is funny. So I'm glad you got. Did you go backcountry skiing then?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. 'Cause I just went up to Hidden Valley. I got a pass to Rocky Mountain National Park. And it was great. Went with Scotty McGee. He happened to be in town. He was taking his daughter to a swim meet, and then he had to do some private lessons, I think. I'm not sure exactly, one of the resorts, Breck or A Basin. I'm not sure. Anyway, so he was doing that, and he crashed to my place for a night. And but when he came down, I said, "Let's go skiing." And so we just went up to Hidden Valley, just one climb, 1,000 vertical feet. It was, let's just say I got a couple of more scratches on the bases of my skis because there was no base covering the rocks and the branches and the roots. So we had to be a little careful on the descent. But hey, we got down, nobody got hurt. My skis got a little nicked, but no core shots. So that was great. It was good. It was good to be out.
Yeah. Are you do you ever do any preseason exercise rituals?
Yeah.
Oh, actually now I know what you're gonna say.
Kelly on ice.
I did you actually go I told I always forget that you did that video. I'll have to I don't even that's up on a Dossie's view, isn't it? Somewhere? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, if anybody wants to get a good kick, go look. We'll look up the old Dosty's view where he goes ice skating. And how did you even get anybody to film you doing that? Did you just like get some
Oh,
random person to do
no,
that?
no, no. See, that was like I've known about this exercise for decades. I've been doing it for decades, okay? And and I tried to get some people to take some still shots back in the early aughts or late 90s. I forget exactly when it was. And they kind of showed it, but they didn't show the dynamicness. And you need to see it needs, you need to have a video. You can't just show still shots for people to get it. And so I had people over the years try and video me on ice, but they weren't good ice skaters. So they couldn't keep up, they couldn't anticipate. But that came about because my nephew was going to Colorado U in Boulder, and he happened to be working at the rec center. And he's a hockey player, so he's a really good skater. And then I said, "Hey, could I come in there and use the rink?" And he says, "Yeah, you can come down while I'm on duty." And actually, there's nobody on the rink. So we had the whole rink to ourselves. We didn't have to worry about other people getting in the way, knocking them down, or anything like that. And he knew exactly what I was doing. So he could anticipate my moves. So that's how it came about. Thank you, Jackson.
Dosty on ice. You can buy
Yeah.
your tickets right now.
Yeah, I know. So then, so then later, I think it was last year, I went to Fort Collins to their ice rink. They had an open, session on a Friday morning. So I went in, and there's only like 5 people on the ice. So I'm like, cool. I don't have to worry about running into anybody. I don't have to, I mean, they're easy targets, if you will, to avoid. And uh, most of them were on figure skates, and they were practicing some figure skating moves, right? So I'm racing around the place backwards, doing these scissors moves. And one of the things I love about it is when you're really cutting and weighting that rear ski, you are just cutting up chunks of ice. And this one guy got really PO'd at me because I was chewing up the ice. And
Mm.
he accused me of threatening people and intimidating them with the way I was skating. So I
What?
just yeah. And so anyway, I kept skating for another 15 minutes doing what I tend to do is figure eights, and that way I get both sides, and I just go around back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and chewed up the ice pretty good. And I realized later that's what he didn't like because he was a figure skater and he didn't like me chewing up the ice. And anyway, so I left. I'm taking off my skates. One of the gals who was in there practicing her twirls came out, and I said, "Hey, I'm sorry if I intimidated you." And she goes, "What?" I said, "Well, I was told by one guy there that I was intimidating people with the way I was skating." She goes, "Oh, I didn't even notice anybody." She goes, "You're good."
I feel like you deserve your own reality show where someone just follows you around and experiences Dosty in real life,
No, no.
intimidating random strangers with your figure eight ice skating. Like, hey, bro, I'm trying to get ready for telemark skis, and why don't you just back off? Okay,
Right.
I gotta make some turns. Oh my gosh. Okay, well. That's good. Well, I'm glad you went skiing. I haven't gone skiing. I actually put bindings on a pair of skis. I'm halfway there. Part of what got us talking is I I bought a pair of TX Pros, uh, which is funny because I realized that probably is more significant to me than like I posted this thing like, yeah, I paid full retail for a pair of TX Pros, and I think people were like, why would you do that? That's so dumb. But I mean, for me, it was interesting. I think I realize if you don't work in the ski business, you know, like I think people don't realize, like, depending on what you're doing, whether you're like editorial or, you know, like you have a shop or you're an athlete or whatever, like you just kind of have access to equipment a lot of times. And depending on how good you're in with the companies, you know, you might have some stuff. But anyways, part of why I wanted to buy these boots is I mean, I held off, dude, because that $900 price tag, I mean, I literally was like, okay, this is a lot of money, which I remember telling boot companies, like, you know, they're like, well, why don't people buy boots more often? And I'm like, they're literally like 800, 900, you know, they weren't 900, but they were probably like $700, $800 boots.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
if you're only skiing like 15, 20 times a year, like, I mean, I don't know what the national average is, but
It's like 4 to
I,
6 days. That's
yeah,
national.
yeah. I mean, like you're not going to cook your boots very quick that way unless you're like skiing like 50, 100 days a year. Anyways, I bought those boots and that's kind of what got us talking on the phone the other day. And I guess I'm trying to find a starting point for here.
What
I
about what do you what I've seen a lot of people commenting on the Backcountry Talk forum, and but very few people have actually skied them. It's all just carpet tests, and to me, a carpet test is not valid. You have to be on the snow and you got to be moving. So, but and you haven't skied them yet, so all you could say is carpet test, right?
Totally. Well, and I'll preface this whole conversation like I I am familiar with the boot because I was part of the testing process for like I'm trying to think when we started. I think 2017, which is a long time ago. So I'm familiar with the boot as like a concept and whatever, but I'd already kind of shifted out of that mode by, you know, middle probably this time last year. So as far as the production model, like I haven't, other than just pulling it out of the box and putting it on my foot the other day, I don't have any. I'm just starting fresh, which I like because I kind of want to look at it with fresh eyes, like a consumer would look at, like, hey, I got this thing out of the box, and I really don't know what to expect. I'm trying to. So yeah. Anyways, I just want to preface the conversation so people aren't like, I'm not acting like I've never seen this boot before, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh wow, check this thing out, you know, and whatnot. But I am interested to talk with you about it because some of the stuff we were talking on the phone the other day, that's what I think is most interesting. Is just I think maybe let's kind of give our takes, and you have a little bit of an advantage because I think you skied the production boot or what you think is the production boot, and
Yeah, what I was told is the production boot, but there's no way. I mean, based on the responses that I'm seeing on my forum, they changed it. They modified it since I skied it and reviewed it, which um, hopefully that means they listened.
and that's possible, and that's kind of why I want to, yeah, just kind of you know, some things with this boot long before. I think I sort of alluded to a lot of the things I think we'll probably talk about in previous podcasts, but I just kind of think it'll be interesting to like give our opinions on stuff and basically first impressions of the boot. So I want to hear your first impressions of the new boot. Just as a
Well,
dude, like here's this new boot. Like we haven't had a new boot since 2000. You could argue what 2011 maybe.
yeah, yeah.
Like when the
Yeah.
Freedom came out, I think is when the TX Pro came out.
No, it was the TX. When the Freedom came out, it was the TX. It was the orange TX. And then they came out with the TX Pro, which was, I believe, a Bumblebee version, black and yellow. And then they changed the TX. And oh no, before they changed the TX, I think then they also came out with the TX Comp. Then they modified at least the colors on the TX. Then they dropped the TX, and changed they've changed the colors on the TX Pro 3 or 4 times. So the final version was turquoise and orange, and anyway,
orange and black Halloween.
yeah.
And then you had the Bumblebee before that. And
Right.
and I think it was I think I confused you because '08 was the free. So I'm gonna try and think podcast minded here because people have no idea what we're talking about. I'll give you some context. Rotofella Free Ride 2008, which is a binding. It was the only NTN binding, and the TX Scarpa TX orange boot was the only boot available for NTN at that point. And then that's what I was saying. The Freedom, which was the second Rotofella NTN binding, came out 2011. I'm positive because I have the video of when you and I actually were at Outdoor Retailer, and they had made Rotofella top sheets for the skis. I don't know if you're
right. Yeah, no, I do remember that. Yes. Yeah. And we did a short tour at Solitude.
Yes.
Inbounds to prove how much better the walk mode was than the free ride, which it was.
It was, but you know what's funny? Just total side note, I realize is I'm pretty sure that was the Outdoor Retailer at that same time that you showed me the original TTS. And
oh yes,
with the G3 Targa heel.
Yes.
And I literally looked at you like, you're dumb. Like, this is never gonna work. But hey, I probably stand corrected. I still don't think it's the future, but
that's okay.
It did go. It had more legs than I thought it would. So
and I did say at that time, this is the future, and you're like, no way. And let's just say for resort only telemark skiers, it's probably not the future, unless you want release, in which case the Meijo is a viable option, and your other option is the free ride. And everybody knows that the Lynx can release, and the Outlaw and the the Bandit can release.
You know they were never going to go with that name, dude. Just
it's such a great name, though. I mean, I'm so sick of people being afraid of upsetting somebody. Well, I might get someone up. Come on, there's so many in-laws in the world, and not all in-laws are bad. And yes, they're the butt of a lot of jokes because some of them deserve it. But I mean, come on, you got the Outlaw with the free pivot for out of bounds, and the in-law with no free pivot for inbounds. And I mean, what a great, people are not that thin-skinned.
Yeah.
I'm glad they didn't call it the Sheriff. They were thinking of that. So Bandit is much better than the Sheriff.
Ooh,
Outlaw Bandit.
I'm coming to get the Outlaw. I'm the sheriff in town.
Can't catch me. I got a free pivot. See you later.
Oh my gosh. People. Okay. So I'm going to bring this back to the boot thing because that's a perfect segue about how silly names are sometimes. And I'm just like, what are we doing? Like, that's okay. Whatever. Yeah. So let's just start it off. Before you get into your first impression of this boot, I just want to mention, why is it called the TX Pro? Why? I do not understand. Here we've waited literally. So we waited 13 years. Am I doing the math right? 2011 to 2024. And it's like, hey guys, I got a great idea. Let's name it the exact same thing that we named the other boot 13 years ago. And you've been waiting for a cool name, but we're just going to call it the TX Pro. Not even 2.0. I just don't. Maybe people probably don't care. I just think it's hilarious. I was all excited, like, oh, we got a new boot. Okay, cool. There's a new boot. It's gonna have like a cool new name, you know? And then all of a sudden it's like, welcome the TX Pro. And it's like, what? And so now people are gonna get confused because when you talk
Yeah.
about TX Pro, you're gonna be like, are you talking about old TX Pro? Or are you talking about new TX Pro? Are you talking about the blue and orange one? Or are you talking about the Bumblebee one? Are you talking about the TX? Maybe you're not putting the right thing at the end of the TX. So, all right, now I've gone on my rant.
No, that's okay. I came up with a new name for it based on my first impression.
What's that?
TX Blow.
Ooh, ouch. That's harsh, dude. Right out of the gate. We haven't even talked about the boot.
They could call it the TX Bro.
TX Bro.
Yeah.
Do you think is it like a I don't know. Okay, so here's the thing. So your initial impression, and full disclosure, you don't even have this boot right now. Like
Nope.
you've
Nope.
tested it at the Backcountry magazine test, you wrote about it, but you don't have one like in hand.
Right.
So when you first put that on when you were doing the test so you could write about it, like what was your like give me the overarching
Well,
summary.
my first impression was TX Blow. This thing sucks because it didn't bend, it didn't flex. I mean, yes, it flexes at the bellows, but for me, a telemark turn, the whole sole flexes. And I know people disagree with me and they say, no, it doesn't. Well, and I don't have the I haven't, I mean, maybe I should just say I haven't bothered to figure out a setup to document that my old TXs actually flex behind the bellows. I'm not saying they flex a lot, but there's a give. And a big part of that give is probably not the sole so much, but it's the flex at the ankle. And the new TX Pro 2.0 2025 is so stiff when it's locked down, I can't bend it. Not the way I'm used to skiing. I had to work very, very, very hard. So my first impression was what it did was it forced all my pressure from the bellows forward. So it wasn't that I was tippy toe, but I was toe dominant. And I'm familiar with, prefer to feel that sensation on my rear foot through my metatarsals, through the ball of foot. And I know that in reality, when you think you're making contact with the ball of your foot, you never really are. It's a figment of your sensation. But that figment of that sensation was absent. All the pressure was from the bellows forward, was on my toes. So I couldn't put as much weight on my rear ski as I'm used to or comfortable with. And so that was a big thing that was missing. And I don't know if it still is or not. And I know that led into this other conversation we had. And I think a lot of people are not, they actually have never experienced what I'm talking about. And so they don't know what they're missing is part of it. And they interpret what they have experienced as being ball of foot pressure. But I don't think it really is. And I think part of that is because they learned telemark skiing on a plastic boot, which gave them a lot of control that we had to finesse in softer leather boots. And so we had to figure out how to balance with softer leather boots. And I know you have experience with soft leather boots. Okay. And in fact, you forced your crew to experience it, which I thought was an awesome thing. So anyway, when you can drive the rear ski through the ball of your foot, you can put more than 50% of your weight on the rear ski. In fact, unless you do put more on, you don't really fully have control. Okay. But if you got a stiff plastic boot, you don't have to put that much weight on the rear ski. You can get away with only putting 40% on, which compared to an alpine turn is that's a lot of weight on your rear ski, but it's not. I mean, ideally, we say it should be 50-50 weighting between the front and the rear ski. And I would say, yeah, that's the ideal. But I like to be able to get so that it's 60-40, 60 on the rear, 40 on the front. And I know in deep snow, in soft snow, I can rock it back so that I can lift my front ski. Well, I can't do that if I have even 30% of my weight on my front ski. There's no way I can lift it. I've got to have like 90% on the rear to be able to lift my front ski.
So that totally makes sense. Like, and that's why I wanted to have this conversation, because I think over the years I have slowly started to understand more about the flex of the sole. And I never, because when you're young and dumb, man, like you just make it work, right? Like,
Right,
and
right.
I think that's what was funny, because I started on leather boots, and I'm glad. That's why I love the history of it. That's why I'm always interested in revisiting that old gear and getting out on it. But I think also what it's done is I've gotten older and telemarked more years, and seen the quote unquote progress of the boots. I think you're correct in that there's a sensation that a lot of people fell in love with from the early days of American telemark and European, like call it like late 70s, early 80s. And you can make the argument even into the 90s, because like even like Merrill Super Comp boots and anything pre-plastic. And I think what's interesting is we often talk about the stiffness of the boot as like a singular topic. Like the boot is stiff or the boot is not stiff. But I think the lateral stiffness is actually like a really important thing. Like that's why you ended up with plastic cuffs on a leather boot, like the Merrill Super Comp in the late 80s. You got the lateral stiffness on the upper part of your boot, but it's funny, and you said like you used to have to finesse things. There's finesse in the way that you can actually twist a boot this way. Like if this was your toe and heel, there's a finesse in how you edged in a leather boot, and everything in a plastic boot kind of works on like hard angles. There's no twist there. You're just like laterally side to side. Every movement's just like this,
Which is awesome. Which is awesome. We love it.
I totally agree. It's awesome. But I think what's interesting with the sole is the sole doesn't have an even flex through the sole. Right. And so you end up not being able to pressure. And one last point, because I want you to keep going with this, but the day that I called you on the phone, I had rewatched a video of mine that I posted on Instagram or something. And I noticed, because that particular day, it was an old clip, and I was skiing T-Race 75 millimeter Scarpa T-Race boots in like a volley switchback or something like that. And what's funny is, again, I know how to ski it. And so I think at the time I just didn't, it wasn't like a go-to setup. I just had, it was like I had it that day and I went skiing. But as I was watching my feet in this old clip, I was like, this is really interesting. Like I'm not necessarily flexing the ball of my foot like in a round shape, because it's so angular. Like I'm pressuring, but the stiffer the bellows and the stiffer the sole is, you can't get that nice rounded ball of your foot like you would like if you were barefoot or like in a pair of sneakers or something like that. And so back to your point, I think there's something lost in these newer boots as time's gone by. Um, and the only other thing I was going to add that we talked about on the phone call was the bindings then have to compensate more with a more aggressive pivot point in order to activate the flex that we're talking about. And I think that's where we get into trouble with a lot of people, because they don't like how it feels because it's a really aggressive pivot point. So anyways, that was a lot of info, but I'll let you take it from there.
Well, no, so there's a lot of things unpack in what you just pointed out. Okay, so you could see in the images of yourself, and I mean, I'm sure it's a vague memory, but you have some memory of what your experience was for that clip, right? And you're like, I was doing fine. I was in control. I was good. Okay. And I agree with you that the side to side, we want that rigid. Okay. But longitudinally, we want a smooth flex. Okay. And with NTM, it's piecewise. I mean, the bellows flex, but they flex in front of the second heel. And what's going on with stiffer boots, and especially with this new TX Pro, is it doesn't give it all that I can feel behind the bellows. So it's just this rigid right angle, the scapo, the cuff, and that's what's doing it. But I want it to be a little bit of a curl on the sole, and then I ski in walk mode. Okay, I ski in walk mode because I want more angle flexion, and that's how I get it. And I guess, maybe it's my history coming from leather, but a TX is plenty stiff enough laterally, and it's dramatically stiffer than leather is longitudinally from toe to heel. But I love the NTN setup because it adds a resistance at the ball of my foot. So it's really easy, I think, to get that sensation if the boot will give a little. And for sure the ankle has to. And that is what is missing in the new boot. And I think a lot of people are going to be totally happy with it because, and I'm not trying to bag on their technique, but there's nothing they're missing. They've not experienced what I'm talking about, therefore they don't need it. On the other hand, if they knew it, I believe, if they had experienced it, they would want it.
I'm interested, and one thing I think it's going to be interesting is to see if what level of binding is required to get the sole to flex like we're talking about, because that is, see, I feel like that's the key factor, because I think here's what for sure I know with not skiing this production boot I just got is younger, more aggressive skiers, and whatever age, but you're an aggressive skier, like you really you want that binding stiff. You're preloading your springs, you're adding stiffer springs, that sort of thing. I have the sneaking suspicion, one of two actually, I'm actually curious what'll happen, because I think it either won't match the stiff binding correctly, and the boot will feel kind of too soft. I don't think that'll happen as often as people that don't want such a stiff and active binding are going to be disappointed because the sole flex isn't there. And so, does that make sense? Like,
yeah. Because if they go with a soft binding, it's just going to flex at the bellows. There's going to be no give anywhere else. And so they need a more active binding to, if you will, restrain heel lift to force the bellows to bend sooner, but also then that allows that resistance of the spring in the binding then allows you to drive your ankle forward, your leg forward, and you get that sensation of a flexing sole. But the scaffo on this new TX Pro, at least my experience of it, was too stiff to have any give to it. And then when it's in walk mode, now the walk mode is absolutely fantastic. We've been asking for that for years. But it's so loose, it's not skiable. I mean, some people, I can ski it. Yeah, but you wouldn't regularly, you wouldn't normally. And while I wouldn't say that I couldn't ski it, it wasn't, didn't hold my lower leg solid enough for me to feel comfortable at anything but slow speed turns in soft snow.
Wait, so are you talking the ski walk mechanism?
Yeah, I'm talking about skiing the new TX Pro in walk mode.
Does not feel correct.
Yeah, it's just way too loose. Okay, I mean,
because it's got the range of motion so crazy.
It moves so much, right?
See, we finally solved the problem of skiing in walk mode. You're not supposed to do it. our long held debate, like,
well, and you remember when we had that first meeting in the Salt Palace in what was that 2014, 2015? I forget. Anyway, it was quite a while ago, right? And so you were there, I was there, Weston was there, 22 Designs was there, Kim Miller was there. Oh, and I should say, before we go too much further, yes, I'm critical of this new boot, but thank you, Kim Miller, for making it happen. It's not my favorite boot, but I think a lot of people are going to be happy and satisfied with it, and I hope you sell out. So that you can afford to build the boot that I want.
See, there's a happy ending there somewhere,
Anyway, where was that? But here was the thing: when we were having that discussion, okay, and I knew having a good walk mode was a done deal, all right. But then this little voice in the back of my head, I was just like, you know what? I'm going to lose my ability to ski in walk mode unless they were to create some kind of an intermediate position, which I'm a minority of a minority, so who cares? We don't care about your opinion. And I knew that was going to happen, and guess what? It did.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't even thought about that. I mean, it sort of raises one of these, you saying the ski and walk mode thing, and I know it's been kind of a funny joke between us for years, but I think what's interesting is one of my concerns with going to one boot, which I think, me personally, I don't think that was a smart move, personally, because
I don't understand. It doesn't take that much to use the same mold and just use different durometer plastic.
Right. Well, and yeah, so there's two ways that there's a couple ways this could have gone down. Is current OG TX Pro, or whatever we're calling it, I mean, easily that boot got a lot of people into Telemark and transitioned a lot of people into NTN from 75 millimeter. That was like the go-to boot. The TX Comp really had its place with aggressive skiers, heavier skiers, people that weighed more and needed more boot. It also racers, people that are racing on the World Cup, that kind of thing. I think if I had my choice, I would have said, hold on to those and offer this new one. Because remember, in the beginning of this whole process, what did everybody want? What was so loud on the internet? We need a backcountry boot with, range of motion, and it's got to be super light, even though that's not the majority of people. Like, I never understood that. You and I have talked about this for years and years and years, and I never understood it. And like, this boot is kind of some of those things, but I don't think it's like all of what that like idea was in the beginning. And that's the only reason I can think they got rid of the other, is because it was so close. It was like an updated version. It was an updated version of TX Pro rather than like a separate boot. So it'll be interesting to see if can you even get back to a lineup from this single boot now?
Well, I
Because
think you can, but you have to be willing to do different injections on the molds. And because I think I mean, they made it even stiffer laterally, but they also made it, in my opinion, overly stiff longitudinally behind the bellows. There has to be some give, I think. A TX comp user or a very aggressive younger skier or a heavier telemark skier, the stiffness for them is probably perfect. But for me, it's too much. Um,
you think the flex profile through the whole boot is perfect except the sole?
no, no, no. I think it's good. People who were on TX comps before and young aggro skiers and heavier telemark skiers,
You're
they're
saying
going to love
yeah.
this boot. They're going to love this boot. Okay. But the
Okay.
people who love the flex of the original TX Pro version 1, if you will, um, are they're going to have to make some adjustments, or we're waiting to see. Some of them may say, "I don't like it." I'm confident there's going to be a significant percentage who don't like it because it's too stiff. I'm not the only guy who thinks that. I'm not the only guy who skis in walk mode. I'm not the only guy who I went with a TX because I wanted a T2 in an NTN platform, and that's all that there was.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. You know what's going to happen too is the people that say it's too stiff is it's going to be a lot of people probably my age and up,
Yeah,
and and what's going to, and this is the dilemma of having one boot that's supposed to not only grow the sport, but it's supposed to maintain all the people with disposable income that are keeping it going. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, and
And
one boot can't do it. One boot can't do it all.
there's no way. There's no way. There's
There needs to
absolutely
be. I
no.
mean, look, when we had that meeting, we knew we needed three. We needed the replacement for the T2, the TX Pro, and the TX Comp. And I would argue that the NTN Tecto platform would be a really good platform for a T4 or a T3, a la rugged touring, kind of what Rotafel is doing with their new Explore binding. But I don't think the boots offer the downhill
No,
control.
those boots are like waffles, dude. Like,
Exactly,
yes.
exactly. But there's a bunch of people on fish scaled skis with metal edges that they want a lighter boot. So like a T4, T3, having Tecto gives you frictionless touring. And if you got an NTN second heel, then you've got a fair amount of control going downhill. And no, you're probably not going to use that system on anything wicked steep if that's not what it's made for.
Yes,
Okay.
we've talked about that. I mean, that's like the T4. I think it's a cool boot, but
Yeah.
the application is much more. It borders traditional Nordic travel with
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
like again, it's how people use the word telemark. Like telemark's a downhill Nordic technique, people. That's all it is. So you can make a telemark turn literally anywhere on anything. And the caveat I would say is you have to be able to pressure the ball of your foot, meaning you can't unclip an AT boot. I mean, you can make the form of a telemark turn, but you're not able to pressure the inside ski. So that's kind of my little caveat
Yeah.
nuance to the,
Yeah.
whatever. But see, and so you bring up a good point with the rugged touring thing, because I've always thought that too. Okay, you make a T4, T3, whatever low cuff two buckle boot version. But this is exactly what I'm saying is if you don't, going back to the soul flex conversation, if you put, let's say you took a current T4 two buckle boot and you put it in a Lynx with regular plates, with the regular stock flex plates, I think it wouldn't feel right. I think
No,
you had
it wouldn't. It's a mismatch.
right. And
Totally.
I haven't really had, I'm trying to think if I skied the soft plates yet. I think I have a pair and I need to, but this is kind of where I'm getting at and is I don't, much like we started getting stiffer boots in the early 2000s, like T Race. How many of us were skiing T Race on G3 Targas? It makes like, I look back and I'm like, I mean, I look back and I'm like, dude, G3, they were so gangster in how they got all of us skiing on that binding when we all should have been, all the T-Race skiers should have been on hammerheads. And that was like the obscure binding. But think of all the people that are hearing this and they're like, dude, I was skiing hammerheads like on position 4 in like 2002 or whatever, you know. I mean, like that makes sense. Is the ability of that pivot point to move. But that's my axe to grind is I feel like I don't now we have one boot and now you have all these bindings with no adjustable pivot point. That is what I feel like is the biggest issue. Cuz how do you match everybody?
Well, they could go TTS.
Well, yeah. Total. I mean, and I mean, I actually agree with you. Full circle. It's the future, Dosty. You were right all along, dude. It was the future all along. Damn it.
Yeah. I mean, that is more adjustable. You can adjust the activity on a Majo. You can kind of adjust. Well, you can adjust it on the links by changing the flex plates. That okay.
But you
And
can't change pivot. You can
no,
change
you can't. Yeah, you can't.
and you and that and I think we've always agreed on that. It's like when you say the word stiffness, it's broken into two things. I always say the stiffness is the actual spring tension and the activity of the binding or neutral feel of the binding is based on the pivot point.
So yeah. Carry on. I'll just
So
add something in a minute.
so you can so I actually I stopped by a customer. I stopped by his office yesterday. He bought Majo from me like 3 years ago because I didn't even sell it. I didn't sell that product like the last year. I mean, this is like I show up. This dude literally mint, like skis, Majo 2.1. Maybe they were even threes. I can't remember. I forgot to look. Either way, mint TX Pros. He hasn't skied him. Why? Because he went out and skied him and he was like just upset. He's like, this doesn't feel like telemarking anymore to me. And I was like, huh, what's going on? And this we had initially had a phone call. And so I talked to him about, hey, what bindings were you on in the past? You know, guy's in his 60s. And, it's like, your body's changing. You're not like you're probably not charged if you're a 60-year-old and charging, kudos to you. But I'm just saying, like, generally you're out having a good time. You're making turns, hitting groomers, skiing some dad pow, that kind of thing. And that was the biggest thing that we talked about was he had two springs in. So he had the black spring and then the small inner spring in the Majo set on a 3, kind of like stock, how we probably sent it out the door. Hey, here's a good starting point. Here's how you adjust it. Go have fun. Let us know. And he couldn't ski. He just like could not ski. And so I went in, I met up with him and I took out the inner springs and set him on like a 2 with a single black spring with no inner springs. And I said, now you have a softer binding, but we talked about the pivot point and I showed him how the bar comes, the metal bar that holds the springs, you can see where it pivots. I said, this does not change. You cannot change where it pivots. And so I told him, I said, go out and ski these single springs. It's going to be softer, like the one part of the softness equation, but your pivot point is not going to change. And if you still are having trouble, and this is kind of what here's where my fears are, is if he, let's say he comes back, he's like, hey, if he calls me and he's like, hey, this isn't going to work, what are my options? You could maybe go TTS, some version of TTS, whether you're talking Langell or Volet.
Actually, yeah, I think you should go free ride.
And
And here's why.
I would say freedom, because that's even more neutral. I know,
Yeah.
but no one uses it. I know, but this is, but to okay, so you can't go links and you can't go outlaw.
No. He can't do anything with a tech toe.
He can't even do anything with a cage toe.
No, he could do free ride or freedom. Okay, and here's why.
I know what you're going to say. The cables.
Well, no, their pivot point is so far forward.
Yeah, it's like the toe.
Exactly. Okay, and Majo, outlaw, TTS in the mid position. Okay, you can go fore or aft. Is 50 millimeters behind the pins. Okay, and free ride and freedom, that effective pivot point is maybe 10 millimeters behind that same location. All right, way far forward. But when you move the pivot point forward, when the tension engages, your heel is much higher up than it is with with any tech toe binding, but also with the outlaw, because the outlaw is effectively 50 millimeters back too. All right. So when you just lift your heel, honestly, with some of them, all you got to do is think you're lifting your heel and you can feel the tension. It's there, like within, that much. And with Majo and Lynx, it's that much. I mean, we're talking millimeters of heel lift. Whereas the freedom or the free ride, you got to lift your heel maybe that much before you start feeling tension. And that is significant. And what he's used to, I'm speculating, but it's educated speculation. I've worked with a lot of people just like you, okay? And so he's used to being able to put his weight on his front ski, and then he'll start to lift his heel and slowly engage the rear ski. But NTN, even free ride, not so much freedom, but especially outlaw, especially Majo, especially Lynx, especially TTS, you have to change how you initiate the turn. And this is where I say you steer with the rear. When I learned to telemark, and I know almost everyone, when they learn to telemark, they're used to alpine skiing, so they're used to having their weight on their downhill ski, and then they slowly add weight to the rear ski as they cross the fall line. But with NTN, when you engage right away, you have an advantage if you pull your foot back, and as it goes behind your new front ski, even though it's still the uphill ski, you weight the rear ski before you cross the fall line and then come around. And if you do that, you enter the turn with more control. But it's backwards. You're used to stepping forward and then rocking back. And when you steer with the rear, you don't step forward. You step back and you initiate by weighting the rear ski. And instantaneous engagement rewards that. You can do that with a duckbill boot, but you have to mentally work hard at it because you don't have to do it. Whereas when you have instant engagement with an NTN binding, it rewards it. But if you're not used to it, it's like it doesn't feel like I'm what I'm used to doing. No, it doesn't until you actually commit and get into the turn. And once you commit and get into the turn, it's like, oh yeah, it's that same sweeping sensation, but the initiation is different. And that's what I see over and over and over again when people switch to, I don't like it. It doesn't feel like telemark. It's telemark, but it's a different style of telemark. And you want to engage the rear ski first. And that's complete. It's like, I got to relearn the turn again.
Yeah.
You do.
Well, but do you?
Should you? Well, and
because the thing is I think a lot of people could play this off like, oh, this is an old person problem. Like they came from leather boots and blah. But let me bring this up. I
Oh,
think it's actually easier to teach somebody, on more neutral gear. And I feel like what has happened is, in hindsight, it reminds me a lot of like where we were at with skis. Like if you look at skis, and here we go from skinny skis, and now there's like kind of a fatter, you get the Carhu Jack in the early 2000s. You're like, oh, 90 underfoot. Whoa, this thing's huge. Within like not even 10 years from that point, we've got like 130 millimeter skis underfoot. And I mean, it just got outrageous. I mean, there was like the Liberty Genome was like 140 underfoot. Now you're starting to see people sort of go, oh, traditional camber, that's cool. Uh, Maybe 95 underfoot. That sounds like plenty. Like, I don't know, 95. That's like getting a little crazy. I live in, Michigan, whatever. You know what I'm saying? I feel like bindings, we haven't had that. We haven't reconciled yet with bindings. Like, and there's all these people where we need to go neutral again. Like, you need to have something that is neutral and available. And if the pivot point is it's the same binding, but you can adjust the pivot point. Again, Russell Rainey, genius. The fact that he made that hammerhead that long ago and had 5 positions, like that, why aren't we still doing that? I mean, there's versions of 75 millimeter, but other than TTS, you cannot change the pivot point. And now we've given people one boot. Here's your boot. And all the choices minus TTS, you cannot change the neutral active feel of the binding. That is my overarching concern. And I think people are like this guy last night, literally, into just to loop back around. Here's my solution. I'm like, hey, call me. I'm like the telemark doctor. Hey, call me in a week. Let me know how it goes. Let me know if you're feeling better. And he's like, I'm like, here's what I'm going to tell you. We're either going to sell your Majos on your skis that are like brand new, and you're going to go buy T2 Ecos and a 75 millimeter binding that's like neutral, like a switchback or something. I'm like, that's solution number one. Or like he literally is like, maybe I just start alpine skiing. So like I was like, man, what a bummer. Like literally we have all this rad technology, and I'm not just, yes, he was older, but I don't think it's an age. I don't think this is an age thing. I think it's easier to teach somebody to feel the ball of their foot on a more neutral binding. And so I think there's,
and a softer flexing sole, because
yes,
let's just say you could use the new TX Pro somehow with a switchback. I mean, that's okay. It's not realistic, but let's just pretend that you could somehow, right? I say the boot is so stiff in the sole, you'd be on your toes. Whereas if you had a T2 Eco, you can flex the sole of the boot with a switchback. And the beauty of that 75 millimeter system, that has not been replicated with NTN. Okay. I mean, I can get a sweet soulful telemark turn with an NTN system with my TX boots. Okay. But I've had to adapt my style, and I'm okay with the adaptation that I've made. But if you don't want to have to adapt your style and you like that sweeping sensation in the telemark turn, in the depth of it, it's hard to beat 75 millimeter. And what is it that caused that all to work? It was the duckbill. That duckbill, was plastic, and it had it had some give to it. And it was that give that gave that slow engagement to the system. And with NTN, it's not slow, it's immediate. And so it's not the sole that's flexing, then it has to become the cuff that's flexing. And that's what I don't like about the new boot. The cuff doesn't flex. I mean, the only way I was able to get satisfactory results was I just loosened the cuff buckle on top so that my leg could move within the cuff, but the cuff was not moving. But I could at least get my leg to move forward enough that I felt more comfortable.
Yeah. That's a good, that kind of circled back with, if you were to take the new boot and put it into like a switchback, that's exactly what I was saying. I could see with the T race in a switchback. It's like,
Yes.
I,
Yeah.
I just feel, I feel like this, we started talking about the boot, and now we're like boot and binding, but that's what I mean. I think everything's so intertwined with each other that how do we, find the right matches for people, And I mean, and you like you said it, you're like, you have to figure it out. I figured it out. I changed my style. I'll tell you, from that 10 years of retail, the one thing I learned was to become probably more empathetic to the idea of people coming in. And I'm like, oh, these people have like paid into the turn. They have like whatever gear they're on. And it was a wide range. It's not just like old stuff, but they have like paid into the turn. And what I mean by that is they have put the work in to make their turn work for themselves. Like they've got it dialed. And time after time after time, they want to upgrade their gear, but then they go try it and it feels like someone just snatched all of their paid in time out of their pocket. And
Yeah.
they're like, and I didn't ever want, I always tried to pride myself on being a place where we're like, hey, like if that's not the right fit, let's try to figure something else out. Like maybe you do need to stay in 75 millimeter, because I couldn't, it makes no sense. Like I feel like you're doing a disservice as a service provider and as a manufacturer if you don't understand these people out there, and then you make something where you give them a singular choice. It's a retention issue, and you're also just snatching. Like there, I guarantee there's people that we're gonna lose just because they're like, dude, I don't like this.
Right.
I don't.
Yeah. And by only offering one, they're denying the validity of their customer.
Well, and people are gonna. I'm sure there's someone that's gonna bitch on the comments and be like, yeah, but it costs X amount of dollars and blah 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 to make. I'm like, I get it totally. I've been around this a long time. I understand what it takes, but I'm just saying it's going to be difficult. It's going to be a difficult road ahead when we're not match. Like things need to match. The binding flex needs to match the sole of flex of the boot, and we need to understand the types of people that are doing this, And so I'm interested to start skiing this thing and kind of see, like, is this, I'm interested. I'm just interested to see, like, is this going to feel good, or is
I
it
think
not,
you're good. I think your first impression is going to be much more positive than mine, but you're younger, you're more aggressive. Okay. But that doesn't, I'm not discounting that you can't, I'm not saying that you can't notice a difference. I'm just saying I think you're going to be um, more satisfied first impression than I was satisfied first impression.
I'll be, that's an interesting take on it. One thing that will be interesting is I feel like this is the continuation of something that I started maybe like 3 years ago, which was I got a pair of TX boots, the lime and gray
Oh
ones.
yeah. Yeah. What'd you think?
I skied them for like 2 years.
Yeah.
And then, and now I don't know the last time that I put a pair of TX comps on, like long time ago, like 6 years ago kind of thing. And I would say I either get the TX or I get the TX Pro. And I'll tell you why is, yeah, I can be an aggressive skier, but what I started realizing, and I guess I didn't really connect the dots till we were just talking about the sole flex, but just I think the way I was thinking about it in my head was the softer boot allowed me to maneuver faster. It didn't slow me down. It didn't slow me down, but I would especially notice it in like bumps or trees, where there was constraints on my movement. Like I needed to maneuver around things. And what I started realizing is I had plenty of lateral stability. I didn't need more lateral. Like even that TX, it's a softer boot. It's probably like, I mean, I don't even know what flex rating. It would probably be like 100 or something like that in like an Alpine flex rate, whatever. It's softer. But that in the TX Pro, I was able to create more base with my feet faster. I could move faster. And if I ran the springs on even on the Outlaw, I don't go super stiff. I don't preload. I don't ski stiffies. And I had to, it was so much more energy conservation while still being aggressive. And I just love, dude, I've fallen in love with it. And so I just, I never realized that the movement of the boot, how important that is to actually being a more aggressive skier is it, because it seems counterintuitive like that. I mean, that's how we all thought 20 years ago. We're like, we got a stiffer boot, stiffer binding, bigger skis. Let's go. And now I go back and I'm like, dude, I can ski the same exact stuff. Same, I would argue better style because a TX comp with a preloaded binding, I struggle because I can't move fast enough. Like I have to put so much energy into each turn that the
Oh, yeah,
aggression's
you
not
get a response. Yeah, you can't do subtle changes, which you can make
that
subtle changes
that's
really fast.
that's the word. Exactly. Subtle changes. You see, that's why we're talking. I just talk long enough that you tell me the right word. No, but I really think it is. There's subtlety to the telemark turn that I think we've lost over time, and I think with less choices and less adjustment within the choices that we're like it's like more. And I'm not one of those guys that's like that boot that's not telemark because that's silly. I mean,
Yeah, I wouldn't
as
say
long
it's
as you
not telemark. It's just for me, it doesn't allow me to get to the depth that I want. And I think, and we were talking about this the other day. I think, there's everyone has their own style, okay, and that's great. But there's also a depth of experience in the telemark turn, and what you were talking about with it's easier to teach people to telemark with a soft boot, and that's because with a soft boot you get the full range of sensation, and it requires you to develop balance. Whereas if you got a stiff system, um, the balance point is narrower, and so you miss that range.
yeah, and I subtlety and range, man. Like those are the standouts from like what you're saying. I feel like we don't have enough range any longer, you
Yeah.
know, and we don't have these little subtle movements. And so of course it's the older people that have been on gear that had more subtle movements and you had to sort of build that into your style with whatever gear you had. I think we've come a long way. Like I don't think we shouldn't have made progress. I mean, it's fun to ski old stuff sometimes, but it was like a different energy expenditure even on that stuff, you know.
Oh yeah, yeah. And it required more energy. Like, I mean,
Yeah,
look,
in a lot of ways.
I'm no spring chicken here, okay? I wasn't born yesterday, but I'm still skiing telly pretty darn good. And I
Yeah.
can open it up and go. I mean, look, you and I have skied, and um you can leave me in the dust, but I'm not that far behind.
No, you're skiing. No, no, but you're really skiing well for sure. And that's what I mean. I don't think it's an age thing, but man, I'm interested. This is an interesting. I want to continue this conversation because I think as we get out and experience this boot and hopefully we can get you on a pair too and I just think it's going to be really interesting to see because now these conversations they're even good for me just to go, huh? I'm like, I hadn't thought about the subtleties of these things. Like, why is that even important? You know? And I wonder if we, in the name of progress, have changed things that needed not changing, you know?
I
Like,
think we have. I think, I think a big part of the goal with this new boot was once again, and this was the reason for the development of the first plastic telemark boot. It was to achieve parity with alpine touring skiers at the time, with alpine skiers, okay, in the downhill realm. Okay. And so the plastic boot gave the stiffness that allowed that to occur, so that you had the edge control. All right. That was lacking with leather boots. And so that was fantastic. Well, then um, we've lost. So we used to have superiority in um, uphill freedom because it was a lighter system. Okay. Then we got plastic boots and we lost the ease of movement of the boot for going uphill. And so Telemark ceased to be the best backcountry tool. And then we came up with a free pivot. All right, so now we kind of got some parity again, but it's a heavier system. And so what was the last step? Well, we got to reduce the weight, and we have new binding technology with free pivots, either something like the Outlaw or, a 2-pin system. But now we've lost the inherent flex of the system in trying to achieve alpine parity. It's like, well, no, I don't want to be equal with alpine. I want the freedom of movement in the cuff for going uphill. Yes, I would like lighter weight, but do not get rid of the telemark flex. That's why I telemark. I'm not hiking uphill in telemark boots to make a parallel turn going downhill. Not that I might not make a parallel turn, but I'm on tele gear because I want to make a telemark turn. So the boot's got to flex like a telemark boot.
Yep. That's beautifully said. I totally agree. Uh, just to close out, I want to bring up, because we got to wrap up. Just, I think something that we pointed out on the phone call the other day is the last 2 times a new boot has come out. Just to point this out, to sort of, again, I think you and I are on the same, like, we want to see Telemark go forward and survive and be great. And I mean, it's never going to die. I mean, I don't think Tele will ever die. But what's interesting is the history of boot releases have proven that they have to do a remake the next year. And that happened with the Terminator, and it happened with the TX. So what I'm curious is, with this conversation, and I'll be honest, in sort of a screwed up sort of way, that's why I bought this one, because I wanted to make sure I had it in my collection. I didn't want to like be chased. It'd probably be cheaper if it doesn't go well. Hopefully it goes well. Maybe there'll be no changes, but I was like, hey, I need this in the collection. I got to have this thing. $900 later. So anyways, tell me your thoughts on this in closing. Will this be the TX Pro next year?
Well, here's what I'm hoping, that they come out with a TX no, as in it's not stiff.
And this is why you should make all the names for Telemark gear. We should just have, what would Dosty call this boot?
Anyway,
oh my gosh.
I'm hopeful that, because they've done it 3 times. The Terminator was too stiff. Okay. And I remember Black Diamond was distributing it, and they thought I was raining on their parade because I didn't gush about it, until they came out with the Bumblebee version. And when they came out with the Bumblebee version, they finally got a really nice smooth flex, and I thought that was an awesome boot. And I switched over to T2 at that point. T1 was too much boot for me. But when they came out with the Bumblebee T1, it was like I gushed over that boot. Okay. Then they came out with a TX, and I was like, because, well, they did something interesting between the time I demoed it and they released it. We all noticed, not all, but a lot of us noticed on this demo tour that we were getting toe pinch. So it's like, well, that's not good. If we're noticing just in one tour that we're getting toe pinch, you got to do something about it. So what happened was, Rotafella offered super stiff springs. Remember the black ones?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So they offered,
those are super stiff.
yeah. So they offered stiffer springs, but then Scarpa independently made the flex on the bellows stiffer too. And so the joke was in the first year of the official race of the TX and the free ride, NTN stood for no telemark necessary, as in no telemark possible.
Because you couldn't even flex the boot.
Right.
You couldn't even flex, like you couldn't even drop a knee because your heels pasted to the ski.
It was so stiff. Anyway, it took another year, and I finally got converted from Mitch Weber, who, took me under his wing for a day at Mammoth, and I finally figured out how to initiate and steer with the rear. And then when I was like, oh my goodness, this is fantastic. Okay. All I had to do was adjust technique. So I think they're doing the same thing here. And maybe it's just that it's easier to make it softer once you know what the response is to a stiff boot, because a certain number of people will love it. It's like, all right, cool, we got them captured, and now we can soften it. Because maybe if they introduce it too soft, they'll turn everybody off. I don't know. It could be a manufacturing thing. Maybe it's just that who they had that they were listening to for feedback preferred the stiffer boot, and so they said, no, that's what our customer wants. And old farts like Dusty, I mean, in a couple more years he'll be dead anyway, so we don't have to satisfy him.
Yeah, that guy's going to be in the ground. Don't worry about what that guy says. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm looking forward to trying this out, and hopefully we can have more conversations as we go along, because I think I'm going to go for a walk, I think next week, and just kind of feel that whole thing out and make some real mellow turns. It'll be interesting just to pick it apart, like just for fun, just like, hey, even the molding process, I'm looking forward to that. I already know I don't like the liner, and
oh really? Okay.
oh yeah, it's too thin. It's way too thin. Okay. But anyways, I'll start dissecting it. We'll get our little tick list together and do it again. But dude, much love. I always love having you on here. Glad we can chop. I'm glad we could chop it up and get deep on this stuff. So
yeah.
And everybody go check out Dosty ice skating on the old Dosty's View. I'll make sure to put a link.
Philly on ice.
Yeah, buddy. All right, man. Talk to you later.
All right. See you. Bye.
See ya.